Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a books beside my bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. Now normally I would film this in my room, but that's not happening because it's been a week. It's been a week and I need to bulk film and we are going to just stay in the one location instead of moving around because otherwise these videos will not happen. This week was exhausting. There were a lot of things that happened, just work stuff and whatever, so it was not my usual kind of reading week, and in fact there is probably only, I don't know, there's three romances on here, but everything else was either middle fiction or short because that was what my brain could handle. So we're going to kick it off with a review title that is coming out at the very start of June, and that is the third book in the Wyler the Koori Warrior series. This one is called Protectors. This was sent to me by Allen and Unwin for review, so thank you very much to them. As I said, it's book 3 in the series, and this one is all about a young girl called Wyler who lives with her family. It is a First Nations Australian story. She lives with her family and her family's village is attacked and everyone is separated and her grandmother is killed, and Wyler takes on the mantle of the Koori Warrior, which means she has to try and harness the energy of the totems that belong to various tribes in order to help defend against the invaders. Really great way to start talking about colonialism with middle fiction readers. In the third book, obviously we're quite a way through the story now, so can't really talk specifics because it will spoil the other 2 books. But at this point, Wyler has really started to come into her own. She's starting to recognize her strengths and starting to trust herself more. In part of the story, she begins to believe that they have begun to fight back against the biggest threat, and along the way now other tribes are beginning to recognize her as the Koori Warrior as well, and so she is called on to help sort out some of their issues. So not only do we have the big picture issue, but we're also looking at much smaller subplots with various groups. So it is really interesting. There are a lot of really fun characters in here. It does include a lot of Indigenous and Australian myth and legend kind of characters and animals, but I do really love how it has incorporated dreaming stories into this fantasy adventure story. So absolutely loving the series, highly recommend it. I also read another 2 books for the younger readers category for the Children's Book Council Awards. So there is Being Jimmy Baxter by Fiona Lloyd. This one is quite a poignant story. It is very short, but it does have a pretty heavy emotional punch to it because in this one we have Jimmy and his mother who are escaping a domestic violence situation. Jimmy doesn't realize it at the time. He thinks he's going on a holiday. And Jimmy is a little bit different. He's a little bit quirky. And he and his mum end up in this very small town while his mother is trying to hide from his father. Jimmy starts going to school, but he doesn't quite fit in. And then his mother gets sick, which he thinks she's sick. We understand it as adults that she is depressed and she can barely get out of bed. Jimmy, wanting to help his mother and wanting to see her happy and smiling again, starts skipping school and starts trying to find jobs where he can earn some money and so that he can buy food for them and so that they're okay. And it is about this town and community rallying around Jimmy without him even realizing it, particularly when Jimmy meets an old man called Mac who lives in an abandoned barn. And Mac has his own story and has been disconnected from his community for a while as well. And through this relationship and through the town supporting Jimmy without him realizing it, you know, things come good in the end. I think this is probably the most heavily emotionally impactful story in the younger readers category this year. Last year there were quite a few that were really, really dark. This one was dark, but there was there was a lot of lightness in it as well because Jimmy is just a really sweet, sweet boy and he just wants the best for his mum and for his family. And then the final book that I read for that category was The Sideways Orbit of Evie Hart. This one is by Samira Kamaldeen and I believe the author herself is Lebanese. So there is Lebanese representation in here through some of the side characters. So it is about Evie. Evie is someone who likes rules a whole lot. She's in grade 6 and she's struggling because there is a girl in her class who is acting out and not following the rules. And this really, really bothers Evie. And Evie herself has tics or eye twitches. And so this sometimes means that people call out and pay attention to that, which she doesn't like. She doesn't like being singled out, obviously. At the start of this book, Evie's class is starting to learn about space and the universe. And the whole book is just threaded with these amazing space facts. It's really, really great. It's often used as an analogy because while she's learning about all of these facts, Evie's family is changing. So her mum and her stepdad are separating. Her stepdad has a new job out in Dubbo, which is quite away from where Evie lives. And so this is a really difficult time for her because she's trying to reconcile that. She doesn't know who her real dad is, but Lee has been in her life since she was 4 years old. and now he's leaving, and she doesn't quite know how to cope with that. And then of course along the way we learned that the other student in the class who Evie doesn't get along with, who often bullies Evie, is also going through a parent divorce as well. And so there's a lot of parallels drawn between them, and a lot of finding common ground, growing up, coming of age, that kind of stuff. It was a really lovely story. The one thing I will say about it though is that I felt like this one was a much slower paced read, and it almost felt like it needed a bit more of an oomph because it's quite a quiet story. But yes, that was The Sideways Orbit of Evie Hart. And then the last middle fiction book that I read was Red, White and Whole. This one is by Rajani LaRocca, I think. I'll leave a title on the screen. I listened to this on audio through Libby. It wasn't very long. I have a feeling it's in verse. I haven't actually seen the physical book, so I can't confirm that, but it sounded like it was a verse kind of story. And this one is about Riha, who is a young girl whose mother is diagnosed with leukemia. And Riha is Indian American. She wants to do all of the things that her friends are doing. And obviously culturally, sometimes her parents don't always agree with what it is that she wants to do. But when her mum is diagnosed, she's allowed to start doing things that previously she wasn't allowed to do. All of this while she's dealing with the emotions of her mum being sick and her mum most likely not being able to recover. And in fact, her mum passes away by the end of the story. And it is about family. It is, again, about growing up, about connection, about knowing who you are and the love that we have for the people who are most important to us. So it was a really gorgeous story. All right, then I read Kicking It with the Winger by T.L. Hamilton. T.L. Hamilton is an Australian author. This is a hockey romance. It was okay. It's one of those books that, you know, is what it is, and you read it and you go, okay, this is great, and then you move on. So this is about Oscar and Mia. Oscar is a hockey player and Mia is a woman who he meets when he goes out to a burlesque show. She is a burlesque dancer amongst other things. This is college hockey from memory. Yes, college hockey. She has had some quite bad relationships in the past. She has dealt with SA and childhood trauma and gaslighting from people. And so she is kind of a difficult woman to, you know, form a relationship with. But Oscar is quite the cinnamon roll and just persists. Like, he just thinks she's great and wants to be with her. And the one thing that stands out in my mind from this is there's a really cool dance lesson. So she's obviously a dancer, and part of the way that they get to know each other is she takes him to a dance lesson. And I love dance lessons in books. I don't know why. I'm not a dancer. I don't really care about dancing, but I love a good dancing scene in a book, especially if it's a dance lesson. As I said, it was fine. It's like a 3.5 star read. Then I read Real Hazard by Elle Keaton. I think I pulled this out of the star jar because I didn't know what to read and I just needed to read something random. And I believe this is part of a series called the West Coast Forensic series. It's book 4. And this is an story. It is about Foster and Dutch. And it does feature a demisexual hero, which I love. I love that in a book. So one of the heroes is an EMT. The other is an ex-MC enforcer who has left that life and is raising his daughter on his own. And he left the life for his daughter. So his partner got pregnant, and at first neither of them wanted to keep the baby, but then he decided that he did. And so he made a deal with his ex-partner that he would raise the baby, but he would leave that life behind. And so he's started a new life for himself, and the two of them meet through, I think the EMT is at the daughter's school. And so they meet that way. The daughter is very precocious. She reminded me a little bit of Jenny from Inner Jam. And yeah, then their paths just keep crossing, and they actually become friends because they don't have a lot of close friends, and they begin to fall for one another. It is a bi-awakening story for one of the characters. I quite like the exploration of the demisexual rep in here because one of the characters knows himself really, really well. And I think it does a good job of explaining what his experience is without it being info dumpy. So I appreciated that. Then I read Luca by Nissa Catherine, which is the first book in the Project Armor series. I've read a couple of other things by Nissa Catherine that are spin-offs of this series, so I thought I'd finally start it. And this is a romantic suspense series with very alpha heroes. Just be mindful of that. Like, it's one of those series. All of the heroes in this book are former Navy SEALs who had been subjected to a scientific experiment without their knowledge that basically turned them into super soldiers. And so they all have various enhanced abilities. This story is about Luca and Evie. Evie has just moved in next door. She is escaping a very toxic ex-partner who held her hostage and was abusive to her, and she managed to escape. And so she's been on the run for ages. And so she moves into this completely rundown, dilapidated, probably unsafe house to stay in because it's the cheapest thing that she can afford. And she meets Luca, and of course she's intimidated by him because he's a big guy. He comes across as very imposing, but he recognizes that she is afraid and tries to put her at ease and backs off and just sort of keeps an eye out on her. And then she unintentionally ends up working at his workplace because she's trying to find a job. One of his business partners gives her a job as a receptionist. There is the workplace element and forced proximity element. And as it turns out, her ex is part of the same project that his team was involved in. And so it's a really interesting kind of romantic suspense story. There's a bit of a sci-fi element threaded in it with that super soldier kind of thing. I am curious to keep going because Nissa Catherine is a Australian author and I would like to see where this series goes. And then finally, I read Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I was listening to the audio of this. I had it out on Libby and I was curious to see how I liked it compared to Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. And I enjoyed this one. I won't say that I didn't, but I don't think I enjoyed it as much as Yumi. And I think it's possibly because the themes of Yumi are more aligned with the sort of things that I like to read about. Anything that has dreams and nightmares is my jam. But Tress of the Emerald Sea is about a young woman who is in love with the Prince of the Realm. He is sent away and ends up being caught by a sorceress and she decides to set out to save him. This is a complete fantasy world and she has to stow away on a ship and ends up caught up with pirates. And in this world there are some parasitic beings who take over humans. There are seas that are not seas, and basically if any moisture gets into the atmosphere or anything, the whole world can, you know, explode. So it's a very interesting story. There are a lot of interesting side characters and a bit of a twist at the end, which I thought was kind of a cool twist. It does come across very much like The Princess Bride, but a little bit more action-packed. The other book I was thinking of was The Paper Bag Princess. But anyway, I enjoyed it, just maybe not as much as Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Possibly because I was listening to it. Although at the moment I'm finding I'm much better at getting through fantasy books if I'm listening to them rather than reading them with my eyeballs. So take that as you will. And that is everything that I have read this week. In the comments, I'd love to know if you've read any of these books or if you're planning on picking any of them up. Otherwise, feel free to let me know in the comments what you have been reading. If you want to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to leave any kind of red emoji down below. Otherwise, I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.